Jenny Turner, Lovejoy Real Estate. Today we have such a special guest. Christian, our content creator, videographer, digital design extraordinaire, is usually behind the camera, but today he's in front of the camera. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's really cool to be here.
So I wanted to follow up on a conversation that we had with Danielle on the team around buying your first house. Because one of the things that you mentioned to me at some point in passing, and maybe you were even talking to someone else, I don't remember, but you said, hey, I didn't even know I could buy a house. And then we had this friend who was an agent who said I could, and then we magically bought a house. Mm-hmm. And when you first started working for us, I mean, I don't know, I didn't know you, right? Like, I assumed you were renting, just probably something you said in passing, I thought you were renting. And then you're like, no, I own it, like it's mine. And fast forward to today, now you own 2 houses, a new one for your family, mm-hmm. and you kept the first one as an investment. Mm-hmm. So go back in time when you were still renting, you didn't own a house. How did that happen? What happened there?
So we were renting this small, like 700 square foot apartment in Southeast Portland. And my wife, Lidio, she works at a preschool. She's the director there. And one of the parents there was a real estate agent. And she approached her and asked her, hey, have you ever thought about buying a house? And she was like, no. And then then she mentioned it to me later that day. And I was like, well, I mean, we could try. I'd always wanted to buy a house. It's just never something I thought I could do.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask.
And all it took was really just the approach, the question, and then the curiosity and talking to a lender. And there we were, the beginning of buying our first home.
Why did you think you couldn't?
So, because homes were so expensive. And so I knew homes were expensive. Combine that with things like mortgage insurance, and then it ends up where you have a higher monthly payment, and it's just I didn't think I could afford that, right?
Yep.
And I think ultimately what it came down to, which is kind of funny, we were paying $1,200 in rent.
Okay.
Which is actually really, really cheap.
Yeah, relatively, right?
Yeah, like that's pretty cheap.
And this is what, like 4 years ago?
Yeah, I think 5 years ago now.
Okay.
Yeah, and so like $1,200 in rent, and that was the most expensive we had ever been paying monthly, because before that we were just living out of my parents' garage in California, and so I thought that was a lot. It felt like a lot. Yep. And I didn't realize how little it was until after we bought the home and realized, oh, we actually can afford to make this monthly payment. You know, it works out because we both had full-time jobs. Right. We just weren't used to it, was all. You know?
Well, and you're prioritizing what you're buying, right? Like, you have to stop buying some of the stupid stuff.
Yeah.
And you have to focus on, no, I need to pay my mortgage, and I need to do those kinds of things.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So she opened the door and gave you the idea of being a homeowner. Mm-hmm. From the time she opened the door to the time like she handed you keys to the new house, how long?
Oh, it was literally like a month. And it's funny because it was a very similar process for the second house.
So the second house I was involved in, right? Like, yes. The second house I know about. Uh-huh. And we just started talking a little bit, right? Like, we just started talking a little bit about, like, what if? Like, what if you need a little more space? Mm-hmm. You had your daughter. She was probably, 5 months old at the time, 4 months old at the time. Yeah. So your house was feeling, because the house you bought wasn't really that big. It was bigger than 700 square feet, but It was still a pretty small house, right?
Yeah, it's incredible how I thought it was great in the beginning, but it was 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, all squished into just 1,000 square feet.
Right.
So it had a lot of, the lot size was decent. It's a really good lot size, but the house itself was very small. And so at the time when it was just the 2 of us, great. But then it was 2 of us and 2 dogs and our daughter. It got really
well, cramped. And you have a big extended family, and your wife has a big extended family, so you also have a lot of company and people coming and going and things like that, right? So having a little bit more space is also good. Mm-hmm. And I messed up a little bit with you because I have a set process we do, right? Like, we sit down, we talk about what you're looking for, you talk to the lender, we get all our ducks in a row. In your case, we kind of found the perfect house too early, right? But it was the perfect house. Like, it had, you guys were looking for a little bit of a unicorn. Mm-hmm. It had exactly what you wanted, exactly in the location. Like, it met all the criteria. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, we had to scramble a little bit to make it work because you kept your first house. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. It'd have been easier if you would have sold it.
100%. In hindsight, it's so important to talk to an agent and a lender first.
I know.
Get your plan together. And the way we did it, it only would have worked because it was you.
It was not the smoothest, right?
Way. Yep. Yeah, it was so, there were so many times where I was like, oh, okay, I guess this isn't happening. But it ended up working out. And yeah, it's like, it was just that we found the house that had everything we were looking for, plus all the things that we thought we couldn't ask for because we thought we couldn't afford at the time.
You know, my favorite thing was when we were walking around, you were like, I was dreaming of a hot tub. And like, you've never said that to me. Like, I had no idea a hot tub was on like the list. Now, I don't ever let my buyers have like, you can't buy a house or not buy a house because it has a hot tub, because you can put a hot tub in, right? Like, people will say to me, I have to have a fenced yard for my dog. I'm like, no, you don't. You can build a fence. Like, yeah, it'd be nice if it was already done, but that's not it. We're not going to buy a house or not buy a house because of a fenced yard, because you can always fence the yard. If there's a yard, you can fence it. But I didn't even know you wanted a hot tub. And then this house magically had a hot tub. Yeah,
it's so crazy how it had all the little things, like even down to the, it has yards on all sides, right? And even down to like, they were cemented. So like we have Huskies and they're like escape artists, and he can't dig under the fence to run away. Like, it was perfect. I can't believe, like, it was all the things that we needed.
Well, and that's why we scrambled, right? That's why we jumped, like, that's why we, even though it wasn't as well thought out, it was worth it because it was perfect.
Yeah.
How's it going as a new landlord?
It's been a process. It's been a lot to learn, I think, more than anything. It's trying to do everything by the book, very carefully, exactly the way it should be, looking into all the laws, and it's been a lot of learning. I think I got really lucky. So far, everything's been going really well. I've checked up on the house. They're taking really good care of it. And you could tell that they take pride in where they live. So I have really good tenants. And it's crazy to think, like, sometimes I'll talk to my friends, and they'll mention how they feel like me and my wife are speed running life because we're only 27.
Compliment,
yeah.
Right? But you're right. At 27, you have 2 houses. You have a fabulous daughter. You kind of have your stuff put together, right?
Yeah.
Now, we know there's more to it, right? There's more to do, right?
Yeah.
Like, we just talked about life insurance, and like, life insurance is your next thing.
Yep.
And when we have multiple things, like, it's leveraged, right? Like, you're leveraged out a little bit more than maybe the person who's just renting. So then you need a bigger emergency fund. You know, not only do you have to worry about your furnace going out, but you have to worry about what happens if your tenant's furnace went out, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes from a landlord perspective, I'll be more proactive. Like, I'll wait on my own house until the furnace dies. But on a rental, if I know a furnace is getting old or a water heater is getting really old, I'll proactively replace that stuff, because then I can do it on my time frame. And I don't have that tenant who doesn't have power or doesn't have heat, doesn't have whatever it is, and is in a panic. So I'll be proactive on that stuff. So think about that as you're going through it, because like, it's the worst when it's Sunday night at 6:30 and like one of my tenants just called me and she's like, our refrigerator died. Can you get us a new one here tonight? No, it's Sunday at 6:30. Like, and it's like in COVID, like, you can't even get a refrigerator tomorrow anyways. Like, everything takes time right now.
Yeah.
But it's that, like, how do you get ahead of that, right? But it's awesome that you have good tenants.
Yeah.
And they're paying and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Having lots of conversations around, like, hey, if there's something wrong, tell me, right?
Yeah.
Don't call me if the light bulb burn out. That's your responsibility. But if your toilet's leaking and causing damage, I want to know. And you're lucky because you're pretty handy.
Yeah, actually, and it's funny because I wasn't handy until I became a homeowner. And then it's just like, all of a sudden you get this bug to start doing all these projects, right? You look at this wall and it's like, I can make this wall nicer.
And so figuring out what that would be. Yep.
Yeah.
So does that mean you watch a lot of YouTube videos?
I watch a lot of YouTube, yes. And it's funny because that's helped me become more handy, but I'm mostly self-taught in even my work and everything I do. So like, I am a graduate of YouTube University. Like,
what was a favorite project you did in your first house?
My first house, let's see. Oof. The first house, there wasn't anything big I did to the first house. I did a lot of lighting. So the entire house was smart. So I had smart everything. I had voice assistants in every room.
So you could say, like, turn lights on, turn lights off, turn music on.
Colors, everything.
Got it.
Yeah, so I think that was my favorite thing, which I already did to my new house as well.
That was what I was going to ask you. What else have you done in the new house? Because you haven't been there very long. It was in pretty good shape, right?
Yeah.
It didn't need a lot, but maybe cosmetically over time, like stuff for your personal stuff.
Yeah, it's been a lot of really cosmetic stuff. So I did all the smart lighting. So like, the entire house is smart thermostat, smart front door lock, lighting, everything. I added latches to all the gates to make them a little more secure for my dogs.
Right.
Little tiny things like adding like a 2x4 stopper for one of the gates as well.
So not big projects though yet.
Yeah, nothing too huge yet. Yeah, just cosmetic.
Do you have a big project coming up that you're gonna do?
Yes. So on the second floor,
Yep.
one of the bedrooms has this unused attic space,
Yep.
and it is just wasted square footage because it is not. It's insulated and not drywalled,
Right.
and so just drywalling that thing and turning it into a walk-in closet and adding that square footage to the house.
Yep.
Easy money as far as equity.
Yeah, absolutely. And much better use of the space, right?
Yeah.
And it's right off the bedroom, so it gives you just more storage, and everybody needs more storage.
Yeah.
Can you do that yourself? Can you drywall?
I do not know how to drywall, but I would
I know how
love
to
to
drywall.
learn how to drywall.
I think drywall is one of the things, like, in my list of hiring things out, it is definitely one of my, I always hire it out.
Yeah.
But maybe in a closet, it doesn't matter if your drywall is not perfect. So maybe you could practice, but drywalling is an art. Like, it is
it
hard
really is.
to drywall.
Yeah.
What would you, did you make any mistakes before you bought your house, your first house? Or maybe even your second house? Like, is there something if you could go back, you're like, oh, if I would have done it this way, it would have been better?
Definitely the second house. So and a lot of this is just because I'm working around so many realtors now and I've learned so many things. But financially, like just having all my assets together, like I didn't even realize how many assets we had in just like 401ks and just things laying around that I had never taken the time to like put together and count like, okay, this is how much money we have in case there was an emergency. And so just having all of that together and having an emergency plan and like things like that, like that's something that I should have done a long time ago. And now
But it forced you to do it when you bought the second house.
Exactly, yeah. So now I have my financials together a lot more. And now I know a lot more for the next home as well.
One of my favorite things, and I update it about every quarter, is a one-page Excel spreadsheet. And it's like all of our assets, all of our liabilities. It has like all my goals for the year. So whatever our financial goals are for 2022 or 2023, I haven't put together next year's yet. But it's like pay private school or whatever those things are. It's all in one place. And my financial planner thinks it's ridiculous because he's like, you do know that you could just like log into our system and everything's there. And I'm like, I don't want something I have to log into. I want one thing on my computer that's just a simple like spreadsheet of where we stand.
Yeah.
Because it motivates me to like pay off that debt or pay this off, or I said I was gonna put this much money into our 401k. That motivates me, and so being able to see it all in one place is really nice for me.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's those little things where as long as it makes sense to you and that's your way, then that's all it needs to be.
Any other mistakes?
Let's see, big mistakes. Ooh.
I mean, you didn't know how much money you made.
I didn't know how much
Which was
money I
part of
made.
the reason we had challenges,
Yes,
right? Because you weren't paying that close of attention to the numbers, right?
Yeah.
And so that's also part of it, I think, and you're not the only person. Like lots of people don't know how much money they make, which in my world, because I'm commissioned, I think that's weird, but it's really normal because we see it all the time with our clients. And they'll say something, and then like when you get the verification employment, you're like, but no, that isn't actually like what it is, right? And sometimes it's because, there was a bonus that didn't happen or did happen. Sometimes there's reasons. But I think a lot of people are just like you just weren't paying it. Like you got the money, you could pay your bills.
Exactly, yeah.
You could buy what you want to buy.
Like I could tell you how much I got each paycheck deposited into my account because that's the number that I saw.
Right.
But as far as putting that together for like an entire year, yeah, I had an idea and that was kind of it.
But that's like once we figured it out, once we dialed in, because especially trying to keep the first house, that meant all the numbers were tighter, right? Because you have to qualify, and the lender's going to give you some credit for rent, but they don't give you 100% credit for rent.
Right.
They give you, I think it's like 75% depending, like
75%.
70%. And they assume some vacancy. Now I'll tell you as a landlord, I have very little vacancy. But when I go to buy a house, the lender assumes all of my rentals have whatever their formula says for vacancy, which is great, but I don't really actually have that. But it means like I get even less rent counted towards it, right? And so, and like we have 4 rentals, so that can add up as it goes through. But it made all your numbers a little bit tighter because it was like, okay, I have to be able to pay this. And you didn't want to rent out your new house until you were moved into your old, or rent out your first house until you were moved in.
Right.
So that took a little bit of juggling too, right? Like, what is it going to rent for? We don't know exactly.
And that's where it was so important, where like you and Steven were very knowledgeable, right? And that's where it matters to have somebody that's really experienced, that's dealt with all of this before. Both you and Steven not only have a lot of years of experience, but you guys also have rental properties and are owners, and like so you guys know. And that was a huge deal because even when I was renting the house out, like I would go to you for advice. Like, what do I say? What do I do here?
Yep. Technically not what we do, but it is what we do, right? Like, and I love rental property as an investment. And I also caution people because, like, what happens if they don't pay their rent for 3 months? You still have to pay your mortgage.
Yeah.
Right? So you have to have some wiggle there. At the beginning of COVID, I was kind of scared, right? Because 4 rentals out there, what if everyone stopped paying rent to me? Like, we'd have been screwed. In the end, only one of our renters asked us. And the COVID rules were a little bit different because you could stop paying rent, but then it would all be due at a certain point. And so when she asked me, I said, hey, you know, I can't, affordability was I can't do it. That was the beginning. I didn't know what real estate was going to do. I'm like, I can't pay that mortgage and my mortgage. Like, it wasn't going to happen. But I also said to her, I feel like paying your rent every month is going to be easier than not paying your rent for 4 months or 5 months or whatever that time frame was at that very beginning when we didn't know anything yet, right?
Yeah.
And then having it all be due at once. And she's like, yeah, that's true. She's like, my mom will help me. It'll be okay. And so everybody paid for us. But I have friends who just put their house back on the rental market. Their tenant hasn't paid rent for 2.5 years.
Wow.
And so 2.5 years, they had a mortgage. They had to pay the mortgage where they live and the mortgage on their rental, while they also paid an attorney to get the renter out.
And that's where, like, it really matters that you have not only the savings, but if you're making a little bit of profit to put into another savings account off of that rental, then, I mean, it's all going to get eaten away by that.
Totally.
Like, that's things you need to take into account, too.
Yeah. And it doesn't take very much to go wrong to do that, right?
Yeah. Like, I was telling my dad, actually, because I've been trying to convince them to move up here, right? Unsuccessfully, but
we all, I'm not winning that battle either, so I understand.
And so at one point he told me, oh, I could just rent the house out and then buy something else. And I told him it's not that easy. There's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of learning the laws. It's different in every state. And you have to have money put away for emergencies. What happens when something goes wrong, you need to go and fix it? It's another job.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you have to hire a property manager, and then your profitability is not as much, right? Because you're paying them out of that as well.
Exactly.
Which a lot of people choose to do that, and that's fine. It's also a timing issue because, like, it makes sense for you guys to keep it as a rental long term. But if you would have come to me and said, hey, I'm thinking about keeping it as a rental for a year or two. Often people say things like, well, I'm just going to wait for the market to get a little better, or I'm going to wait for this, or whatever, like whatever their story is. And it's a short-term thing. You should never rent it for a short term because capital gains. Like, if you would have sold that property, you'd have been exempt from paying any capital gains on it because it had been your primary residence for 2 of the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And so $500,000 as a married couple would have been exempt. You did not make more than $500,000 on that house. So all of it would have been tax-free. But now that it's on the rental pool, if you come back to me in 4 or 5 or 6 years and say, hey, now we're ready to sell it, then we're going to have to either you're going to pay capital gains, or you have to do a 1031 and exchange it into another rental property, right? So that's a good way of growing your wealth, is holding a property long enough that you could sell it and buy 2.
Yeah.
So you've held it long enough that you have enough equity that when you sell it, you can take it and you can 1031 into 2 properties. That's one of the ways that Charles and I have gotten to where we got our own doors, because we were able to 1031 into that. Even our current office, that we 1031 our previous office. So we sold the small little condo office and used that money as a down payment for the new office. And so it let us roll that through and defer those capital gains.
Nice. Okay. See, that makes sense. That's the type of thing that's super useful to know, because we do plan on eventually buying more properties.
Right.
Right. And that's the great thing, I think, and one of the biggest ways real estate has kind of changed my life is that for so long I thought that I always had a passion for what I do. And I thought I could either do what I love or make money doing something I didn't. And now, luckily, I could do what I love and still make more money by owning real estate. And that's probably one of the biggest things that I'm gonna try to pass on to my daughter is do what you love, and then if you still need to make more money, invest elsewhere. Yeah. Real estate is a good place. And if you do what
you love really well, there's more money in it.
Yeah, that's
right?
it.
And it's enjoyable. Like, you like getting up and going to work, and you like figuring it out, and you like doing it, right? Like, I love doing real estate. It's hard, right? It is hard. And this last week has been a little harder than normal, but I still love it. Like, I still love meeting new people and figuring out how to, like, overcome those obstacles and, like, okay, we know this is the goal. How are we going to get there? Right? What does that look like? And I know I know our end, but then, like, we have some roller coasters of like, hey, okay, we had to do this. And like, even with yours, we shifted a couple times. Like we did FHA, then conventional, then FHA again, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Did we end up closing FHA in the end?
You know, I knew for such a long time, and then
I think we ended up closing conventional.
We might have. I really don't remember anymore.
Yeah, there was all sorts of rules, and that's because the guidelines were different for your rental property.
Right.
That's what it ultimately came down to was FHA had different criteria than conventional, and you're right. I don't remember which one we ended up on, but they had more requirements around that, and so it's figuring out, okay, hey, how do we best fit in the box? Because when you best fit in the box, you get the best package, lowest interest rate, lowest fees. It's the best deal.
Yeah.
But you guys have changed your family tree, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a whole. So your parents owned a house though.
Yes.
So you did have a little bit in your genealogy.
Yes. So it's I had a really good example, I think, in my parents. So my parents came from Guatemala and El Salvador. They came as immigrants. This was in the 80s, I believe.
Okay.
And
before you.
Oh, yeah. And my mom and dad were, I think, 18, 19 around there. And that's when they met, and they ended up getting married. And they bought the home the year, I think I was 1 year old.
Okay.
When they bought their first house. It was foreclosed on, so they got a really good deal on it. They got to a point where they couldn't really afford it anymore, and then my mom had to start working, and then they were able to keep affording it. But they bought it for something really cheap, like $150,000. And it was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath.
Nice.
Really
in California.
Decent, in California. And so now that house is worth upwards of $800,000.
So one of the things that I was thinking about on that is so $150,000, let's say now it's worth $800. So if they were to sell the house, they would actually probably owe capital gains because they're married, but they have more than $500,000 of profit, right?
Oh, so actually they refinanced a few times.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Oh. Doesn't matter how much cash you pull out. It's the basis of what you buy. So they're going to have to be really thoughtful around how they sell. Yeah. And we mostly see this as a problem in California more than Oregon, to be honest, because the California market is so volatile and has gone up so much over the years. And because of how the property taxes are set in California, it encourages people to hold for a long time and not sell. And so sometimes my clients keep their property in California as rentals and then buy up here. And then let their kid inherit it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I always have said, like, you 1031, so you exchange, and then you die, and your heirs get to never have to pay those taxes. Statistically speaking, most people stop doing exchanges at some point. At some point, they say, I just want the money. I'm okay paying some taxes, but I don't want to have the hassle of having this rental property anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Because it is hassle. Like, you've had a pretty good run, but, like, it's still hassle.
Yeah.
And it could, like, we've really only had one bad experience in 20 years. Like, I had one experience where, in hindsight, I should have been smarter. Like, she was just a con person. And she moved in and never paid me a dime. Her deposit check bounced. She lived there for 6 months. It cost me $34,000 in attorney fees. Wow. And didn't pay rent for 6 months. And, like, so much of my time. And, like, ask Shada about it sometime because Shada was working for me at the time. And it was her time, too. Like, she was helping me manage the crazy. But, like, the lady was just crazy. But one time in 20 years isn't bad. Right? So, like, at the time, it sucked. Like, that was 2018, and it sucked. But now, like, one time was a pretty small window, so. Yeah. But I did sell that house. It just had bad juju. I had to sell it.
It wasn't worth it anymore.
It wasn't worth it. Like, it was a good house, but, like, once I got her out, I'm like, yeah, no, we're, like, I had one more good renter move in, and then I'm like, yep, that house is gone, so we don't even own that house anymore. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for having me.
Jenny Turner, Lovejoy Real Estate. Follow us on social and listen to us wherever you catch your podcasts.
Jenny, thanks again for having me. Christian Panado, Lovejoy Real Estate. You can follow me at cristianepenado on Instagram or on Elias Panado on TikTok.